Welcome to this YSL tutorial on using the openpyxl module to link to Excel from within Python. So here's what you'll learn during the tutorial. The very first thing we'll look at is whether you're watching the right tutorial. There's lots of ways of working with Excel within Python, and the openpyxl module is just one of them. I'll then show you how you can get started by installing the module and how you can reference cells. And then we'll go on to look at how you can open, close and save workbooks, how you can insert and rename worksheets, and then how you can loop over worksheets, and we'll look at a couple of different ways to do that. And finally, I'll show you how you can loop down cells and also show you the concept of offsetting, which is where you can go a given number of rows down and a given number of columns across from a cell to get to the contents of another. At any point, you'll be able to click on a link which should appear about now to download at the top right of your screen to download any files and exercises to do with this tutorial. But I think that's about enough of me. Sven's on holiday at the moment, so I've vanished, but his cousin Wilbur will guide you through the rest of this tutorial. So let's get started. So what I want to do before you start learning to use openpyxl with Python and Excel is to just check you're on the correct tutorial and to see what you should be learning. I've come up with 3 scenarios which will explain, given what you already know, what you should be using, what it will let you then do, and which tutorial you should watch next. So the first scenario is you either know or need to know pandas. And if that's the case, you should definitely be learning pandas and using pandas. And what that will let you do is basically work with Excel data, but in something called a data frame within pandas. And then you can read it in from Excel and write it back to Excel without ever actually needing to know any Excel. And if that's the case, the next tutorial you should watch is the pandas tutorial, which is going to be the next but one in this series, I think, and will certainly be written within a few days of this one, or created. And that uses 2 built-in modules called XLS Writer and openpyxl, one or the other, but only as a very small part of it, and all will be explained within the tutorial. So the second thing you might know is you might know VBA within Excel, or indeed any other Microsoft Office application. And if that's the case, you should probably be using the win32com.client, which is a module which will let you get access to the COM object model in Excel, which basically means anything you've written in VBA within Excel, you can rewrite and get working within Python. What should you watch next in this scenario? Either the next one in this series, next tutorial 17b, or possibly one of our VBA tutorials. It does seem a bit strange to be rewriting VBA with Python when you could just write it within Excel, but maybe I'm missing the point. And the third thing you might already know is just Python. And if that's the case, you need to use openpyxl, and the good news is you're on the right tutorial. And this is a module which lets you read and write Excel workbooks, create cells, create formulae, do all these wonderful things within Excel, but without using Excel or VBA, so it's purely Python based. And in that case, you need to watch this tutorial. So let's get started with it. So the first thing we're going to do is look at working with cells. I've created a file called workingwithcells.py. And in order to be able to link Python and Excel, I need to import the openpyxl module. But if I run that, you can see that it's not heard of that. And the reason is I haven't actually installed it. So I need to quickly go and do that. So if I create a new terminal window, and if I run pip space install space openpyxl, and that's the module I'll need to be able to link to Excel. And now it's installed it, I should be able to run this program, and I've got my module working. So that's a good start. So what I'm going to do is create a new workbook. It will contain the words "the meaning of life" in cell A1, and in the cell to the right of it, it will contain the answer, which is, of course, is 42, as anyone who's watched The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy will know. So what we're going to do firstly is to create a new workbook. And to do that, you create a variable, let's call it new book, and you set it equal to openpyxl.workbook. And what that will do is create a new, I guess it's a workbook, but it's wrong to think of it in Excel terms. It's something which is just held in memory and you'll never actually see on screen. So what we can now do within that is get a reference to the active sheet. You need a reference to a sheet so that you can work with cells within it. So I'll call it current sheet, and I'll set it to be newbook.active. When you create a new workbook, it automatically puts at least one worksheet in it, and that becomes the active sheet. So essentially what I'm just doing there is referring to sheet 1. We'll look later in this tutorial on how you can create and rename sheets. So what I can now do is write information to the cells. And I'm going to start with cell A1. What I'm going to do is show you two different ways to write information to cells. There are basically two ways. The first way is to treat this as a dictionary and treat the cell reference as a key, which means, of course, it needs to go in quotation marks. So I could set that, and I could set the value of that to be, let's say, the meaning of life. So that's the first way to refer to a cell using the A1 style reference. And the second way to do it is slightly different, which is what I can do is use the cell object or cell method. And in brackets, I can specify the row number and the column number. Now I could, if I like, use the named arguments as I have done there, but you can also just put in the row number. So if I want to put row 1, column 2, which is a cell just to the right of this, I can then put dot value equals, and then I could put the value, which is 42. So the last thing I need to do to be able to see this is to save this file, because if I don't do that, it will do it happily on screen or inside the computer's memory, but I'll never see the result, so I'll never know if it worked. So what I'm going to do now is to take my current new book, and I'm going to save it, and I'm going to save it in this folder. So I'll just put a little R in front of that, and I'll call it Douglas Adams SX, who of course was the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And what that should automatically do is to save that file. So let's try this out. If I run this program, and you can see nothing's happened, which is probably a good sign. And if I go to where this is stored on my computer, you'll see I've got a file. It's not very nicely formatted, but it contains the information I wanted, the meaning of life in cell A1 and 42 in row 1, column 2. There's just one more thing I wanted to show you on working with cells, which is this. You can, as people who know VBA will be very familiar with, miss out the dot value. But you can't do it for the second one. If you do it for the second format, you'll get an error, as this will show. So you can see I'm getting an error message on the second line. You can, if you like, though, use a different format. You can say 42 like that. I find this harder to read and don't particularly like it, but you can see it will work. And then if I go back in and have a look at that again, you can see it's recreated the same file. So that's the basics of how you can work with cells. Let's have a look now at how you can work with workbooks and save and close and open them. So what I'd like to do now is to look at working with workbooks in openpyxl, and to that effect I've created a file and included it with this tutorial called listoffilms.xlsx, and it's a list of 10 films. We've worked with it before, I think, in a previous tutorial. But when you click on it, you can't see the films, and when you right click there's no obvious option to choose. And that's because Visual Studio Code doesn't include a built-in Excel viewer. So let's hunt for one. If you go to the extensions icon in the activity bar on the left-hand side and click on that, you should be able to type in the word Excel, and hopefully it will suggest something useful. So the Excel view at the top has got 1.7 million views, which I guess is probably good enough for me. So I'll install that. It should only take a second or two. It's worked. And I can now go back to my list of files, and I can click on my list of films Excel workbook. I still can't see it. But if you right-click and choose Open Preview, then you can see the films. Except there's two worksheets in this. One is called Sheet 1, and the other is called Films. So I need to make sure that I actually import the films themselves. Sheet 1, I think, from memory, just says there's nothing to see here. Now, in the list of films, I've got the B-movie. I've mentioned it before, how ludicrous it is, the plot is. And it says it's got 1 Oscar, so that's in cell E6. It didn't win any Oscars. It didn't really deserve any, to be honest. So what we're going to do is change that E6, the value of E6, to 0. So to do that, I have created a file called workingwithworkbooks.py, and we can start writing some code to do this. So the first thing I'll do is not there. The first thing I'll do is import the openpyxl module. And then what we'll do is open up the films workbook. And To do that, I'll create a variable called film book, and I'll take my openpyxl module, and there's basically two main things you can do. You can create a new workbook or load an existing one. So I'm going to load an existing one. The name of the workbook I'm going to open is conveniently in my clipboard with its path. It's there. And that should give me access to it. Now the next thing I need to do is make sure I'm working with the correct worksheet. So I think I need to put work with correct worksheet, so I don't do everything to do with the first worksheet, which doesn't contain anything. So I'll create a variable called films sheet. And to do this, I can just refer to the name of the workbook or reference to the workbook, and in quotation marks, I can use this as a dictionary and refer to the name of the film sheet. And I know it's case sensitive, and I just want to prove to you that it is. That isn't going to work actually, whereas it would do in Excel. So now what I can do is I can try changing the Oscars. And to do that, I can use one of the two conventions I've shown you before. But because we know it's in cell E6, it makes sense to use that probably. So I'll change the value of that cell to be 0. And that's it. So now I can just save my changes. And this doesn't quite work the way you would think it would. You would think you would just take the name of the workbook and save it, and so you can. But what you can't do is miss out the argument, as we'll see in a second. And then I'll close this file. So filmbook.close. So that should be the end of the problem, except I'm going to get 2 crashes. Let's try running it. So the first one I get is the worksheet films does not exist. And the reason I get that is I just wanted to emphasize it really is case sensitive. Let's try again. So the second crash I get is I'm missing a required positional argument in line 14, which is this one. And what I need to do is specify the name of the file. Now I actually want to save it in exactly the same place, but it seems that the way you have to do that is by repeating the file name. It's a strange implementation of it. I would have thought they could make that an optional argument, but they haven't. So now if I try running that, it's run successfly. So the proof of the pudding, as they say in English dialect anyway, will be whether I have now got the B movie changed. And if you go to cell E6, you'll see it's gone down to 0. So it's all worked. So that's how you can work with workbooks. Let's have a look now at how you can work with worksheets. What we're going to do now is to see how you can work with different worksheets in openpyxl. I've created a file called workingwithsheets.py, and we're going to import the openpyxl module. And then what I thought we'd do is create a new workbook and add some worksheets to it and just have a look at how you can rename them and how that works. So to create a new workbook, let's call it new book. Why not? We'll take the openpyxl module and create a new workbook within it. And I think that's a comment, like so. So this will automatically have one existing sheet in. So we'll automatically have one sheet called sheet actually. It's not called sheet 1, which it would be in Excel, it's just called sheet. So what I want to do now is to create a new sheet to hold musicals, let's say. And to do this, you can take the new workbook and apply the create sheet. You can see you can create a chart sheet or a name range. This tutorial doesn't attempt to show you everything you can do with openpyxl, but just enough to get you comfortably started. So I'll create a new sheet and I'll call it musicals. So the argument it's expecting is the title of the new sheet. And because I didn't specify where that will go, it will automatically add it at the end. So we'll now we'll have the sheet, then we'll have musicals. So those will be the 2 sheets. So now let's add a worksheet start. So to do this, I'll create another one called animations sheet. And I'll take the new book, I'll create a sheet within it, and I'll call it animations. But critically, I will put the second argument in as where I'm going to put it. I'll put it at the beginning. So my order will now go And the reason I'm showing you this is because at the end I want to prove it's actually worked. My order will now go animations, sheet, and musicals. So let's have one more worksheet. So we'll add one more sheet, one in the penultimate position, so one before the end. So we'll call this one comedy sheet, and I'll create a new a new worksheet within the workbook. I'll call it comedies, and I will position it just one before the end. So that's what the -1 is doing, just one before the end. And so my list will now go, trying to keep this up to date. Go animations, sheet, comedies, musicals. And then the final thing I was going to do is I was going to rename the sheet called sheet as something else. So to do this, I can refer to the new book, and I could do it in one of two ways. This will certainly work. So I'm not going to do it, but it will work. I could set the title of the worksheet to be what I want it to be. So let's say I want dramas. But I'm going to comment that out because I don't believe it's a very reliable way of doing it. It assumes that the worksheet will always be called sheet, and I can imagine in some future version of this module that will be changed. So rather than doing that, what I'll do is refer to the collection of worksheets within that, and I will change the name of the second one in the list, or change the title, and I'll change that to be dramas. And that's a more reliable way of doing it, although again, I'm assuming it actually is a second one in the list. All that done, I think I can now save my work. So to do that, I will take the new book, apply the save module to it, and with a bit of luck, I've done something else in between. I'll pick up on the path and save it to that. So if this works, my path is there, a file called films by genre should appear there, and I'll be able to inspect it. And another thing I'm going to do is just to close that workbook down. So there's a lot riding on this. Let's try running it. So good news is that's worked. And if I right click on that and choose Open Preview, you should see I've got animations, dramas, comedies, and musicals. Is that what I said I would get? Animations, drama. Yes, it is. I've got it in the right order. They're showing up as completely blank. What I could do now is just modify this, but I think I will do. So I'm just going to write some information sheet so you can actually see it's working. So let's start with the animations. So I'll take the animations sheet and I'll set A1. An animated film, and the shortest one I can think of is up to save myself typing and save you typing. We'll set the comedy sheet. We'll set A1 again, put everything at the top left, and I'll add in a comedy there. And absolutely nothing springs to mind. Let's put Borat in. We'll set the dramas sheet, which hasn't got a name, so I can refer to that as new book dramas. And we'll set the value of cell A1 be a drama. Let's have Gone with the Wind, traditional film. And finally, we will set the musical sheet. And we'll set to be La La Land. So if I run that again, see that when I preview the file, it's still not there. And that possibly could be because I chose a different name or because I've left it open. Let's just quickly try one more time. It was because I left it open. So if I go to each of the worksheets in turn, you can see it's set the files. Sorry, it's set the values. So that's how you can work with worksheets. I think what we'll do now is look at how you can loop over them in the next part of this tutorial. What I want to do now is show how two ways in which you can loop over the worksheets in a workbook. And if this works, we'll print out this output. So we'll print out the names of the films in cell A1 in each of the 4 worksheets in the workbook we just created. So just to remind you what that looked like, it looked like this. So we've got 4 different worksheets, each one containing the name of a film. So to get this to work, we need to import the openpyxl module. And then what I'm going to do is open up the genre workbook. So to do that, I will create a file. Let's call it book, let's be shorter. Take the openpyxl module, and I will apply the load workbook method. And in brackets, I will put in the name and path of my file. So what I can then do is method 1 is I can get a list of all the worksheet names. So what I'm going to do is create a variable which I'll call sheet names, and I'll set it equal to the worksheet names. And if I just print that out to show you what it's done and try running that, you'll see it's just given me a list of all the different names of all the worksheets in that workbook. So what I could now do is loop over each of these. So I could say for S in sheet names, could set this sheet to be this particular worksheet. So I could take the workbook and then I can put the S in as a key to the dictionary, to its name. And then I could print out this sheet. And what I'll do is print out the value of cell A1, which I hope exists. It should do. If I run that program, which seems to have got no comments in whatsoever, so apologies for that. Let's just add some comments in. Loop over all the worksheet names. If you don't put comments in, you've no hope of understanding it in the future. So get a reference to this worksheet in turn. Oh, my conscience is completely clear now. So if I run that program, you can see it gives me the 4 films. But there's an even better way to do it than that, which is why I'm going to comment out all these lines of code and show you the better way. That was good. This way is better. So the second way to do it is to just say, loop over sheet, is say for, let's call it S again, in. And then what I can just do is just put the word book in, which is in the reference to the workbook. And that will automatically assume that S refers to each worksheet in turn. So what I could then do is just print out value in A1. So I can just say print, and then I can say S, and then in brackets, square brackets, I can put A1 and put dot value. If I run that, you can see it gives me the same results. So the reason that worked, it's clearly much easier, much better, is that when you refer to a workbook, it assumes it's a collection of individual worksheets within it. And so when you put this construction in, it assumes S refers to one of the worksheets at a time. So 2 different ways to loop over worksheets. So the last thing we're going to look at is looping over cells. But just before we do that, I need to explain clearly what I'm trying to achieve, or what I want to achieve, or what I want you to achieve, actually. So there's a file called listoffilms.xlsx, and if you right-click on that and choose Open Preview, you'll see our list of films. What I'd like to do is get a list of each film given the title and how long it lasted. So we'll get Evan Almighty lasted 95 minutes, Transformers lasted 144, and so on. And that will keep going until we get the Bourne Ultimatum, which lasted 115 minutes, and that will be an end of it. One way to achieve this is to loop down this block of cells from A2 down to A11. And for each cell in that block of cells, what we'll do is pick up 2 things. We'll pick up the title, and we'll also pick up the minutes. Then we'll automatically go on to the next cell and do the same thing for that. Now, to get to the title and the minutes, given all we know is we're on cell A2, what we need to do is to specify 2 things. So they are the number of rows you're going down and the number of columns you're going to the right. So to get to the title, you'll go down 0 rows, because you're still in the same row, but you'll go 1 column to the right. And to get to the minutes, you'll stay on the same row, so you won't go down any rows at all, but you'll go 5 columns to the right if you count them. So you always go, when you're offsetting, that's what we're going to be doing, offsetting, you always put the rows first, and that's how many rows you're going down. And then you put the columns, and that's how many columns you're going to the right. If you want to go up or to the left, you simply put negative numbers in there. That's what we're going to try to do. Let's now see if we can do it. So I'll close that down. And I've created a file called looping over cells, or loopovercells.py. And what we're going to do within this is to begin, I keep doing that, begin by importing the openpyxl module. And then I need to open up my films workbook. So I'll create a variable called filmsbook, and I'll set it equal to openpyxl.loadWorkbook. And then, as always, I happen to have the name of it in my clipboard, so that's the file we'll open. What I then need to do is to get a reference to the active sheet, or rather the film sheet. So I'll create a variable called film_sheet, and I'll set that equal to the films book. Then in square brackets, I can put the key to the dictionary object, which is the name of the film, the worksheet, which is films with a capital F. I'm not going to make the same mistake I did last time and put it in the wrong case. So what I can now do is loop over all the cells in a range. I want to loop over all of the cells, first column of IDs. Incidentally, I didn't have to do it this way. What I could have done instead is I could have looped down the titles instead, in which case I wouldn't have had to go any columns across to get the title. I could have just put 0, 0 and stayed where I was. It's probably good practice when you're looping over cells to find the value which gives the primary key or the unique number. In this case, it's possible two films may have the same title, but the ID number will always be unique. And it's usually the thing on the left-hand side that you want to loop over. It makes it easier to work out if you're always going off to the right, offsetting to the right to get the information you want. But we could have done it a different way. So we're going to loop over all the cells in the first column of IDs. So to do that, I'm going to call each one cell. And I'll say in film sheet. And rather than putting a single cell reference in here, what I'm going to do is put A2 colon A. Now, those of you who have done much VBA programming will probably be thinking, why isn't he using a named range? You could do, for those who know Excel range names, but they're an absolute pain to work with in Python. And I have to draw a limit somewhere with this tutorial, otherwise it'll be every single part of Python VBA basically, and I don't want it to be that. I just want it to be an introduction, but you could certainly use named ranges if you wanted to. So now I'm looping over every cell. I want to get the title and the duration in minutes. So to do that, I'll create a variable called title, and I'll set it to this. Cell refers to the current cell in the block of cells I'm looping down. So initially it'd be A2, then A3, then A4, etc. From there, I want to offset it, and I want to offset it 0 rows down and 1 column to the right. And then I want to get the value of the final result. And likewise, I'll set the minutes to be the cell dot offset 0, 5, because I want to go 5 columns across and get the value of that. And what I can do is print this out. So I can print out a message saying, placeholder, saying the film name lasted that many minutes. And I can then substitute in the two things I found, the title and the minutes, to produce a nice looking message. So that's my program. See if you can see anything wrong with it. And if I try running that now, you'll see it gives me an error message. So why is that giving you an error message? And why is it saying the tuple object has no attribute offset? That seems a very strange message. When you loop over cells, they behave in, I think, a very strange way. To show you this, I'll just comment these lines of code out. I'll be able to put them back in a moment. And what I'm going to do is to print out just the cell I've got. And let's see what it's actually giving you when you loop over a block of cells. So if I run that, what you can see is for each cell, you get a bizarre tuple. And the tuple contains a single value, which is a reference to the cell. Now, why it doesn't just give you the cell itself, why it has to do it in a wrapper of a tuple, I couldn't tell you. But it does explain why we got that strange message about tuples, and it does show us how to solve the problem. What I need to do, instead of taking the cell, I need to take the first element of the cell. Remember that it's a tuple containing a single value. Well, if I refer to that single value, that will give me not the tuple, but the cell itself. And if I now run my program, you'll see it solves my problem and gives me the answer. And that's fairly typical of working with openpyxl. It's full of weird foibles like that, in my opinion. And that's the end of this tutorial on working with openpyxl. I hope I've whetted your appetite. There's clearly a great deal more you can do with it. I will leave you with one last thought, which is if you are going to be spending so much time manipulating things in Excel, is it really not worth learning to do it in Excel VBA instead, which is a native language? Just a thought.